computer. Dr. Chidora, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you, Anotida.
Wonderful, wonderful. How's work and your family?
Well, we are trying. We are trying.
In the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic.
You know, it brings many things to a standstill, but we are trying to move on.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I understand. Well, today we want to have a discussion, particularly with you, about the topic, the power of words, the role that fictional literature plays in times of revolutions like this, especially considering the political upheaval that we are witnessing currently in Zimbabwe. But before we get to the discussion of that particular topic, I just want you to give us a brief description of your academic career, your current academic career right now, and just probably a brief discussion and description of the current publication that you have made, because sadness is beautiful.
Yes, yes. Thank you. I teach popular culture and literature, theories of literature, then creative writing in the Department of English at the University of Zimbabwe. I've been teaching there since 2014. I attained my doctoral degree in 2018 at the University of the Free State in South Africa. And my research focused on the theme of migration in post-2000 Zimbabwean literary publications in English. Mm-hmm. Currently, I'm very much interested in the interface of literature and memory, which is why I find today's topic very apt, because the purpose of literature is to store memory. Literature is a repository of memory. Mm-hmm. So when you talk about revolutions, memory, and literature, you can see the connection there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. But besides academic research, I'm also a creative writer. I have a single short story that has been published in an anthology of Chitungwiza, titled Chitungwiza Mshamukuru. It's an anthology of various artists, poets, short story writers, musicians, and so on and so forth. I featured in that anthology with a single short story, which happens to be my first short story. It's titled Days of the Sun. And in that short story, I try to capture how a writer like me or a poet interacts with the Chigwanyika landscape. Chigwanyika it's a very old township that is found in St. Mary's. And so as a poet, I try to capture the sensations, the impressions, the life, the noise, that you find in such an old suburb, including the crumbling buildings, everything. I tried to capture that in a single short story titled Days of the Sun. And my purpose in that short story was to not only portray the ghetto, in this case Chigwanyika, as a seething cauldron of crime and violence, but also show that even in that landscape that people perceive as a seething cauldron, there is life that is happening there. There is poetry that is happening there. There is art there is inspiration for poets and singers and various other artists. That's what I was trying to do in that short story. And then because Sadness is Beautiful, which is my first solo publication and a collection of short stories. The reason why I actually wrote that collection of short stories is that I've been promising my readers for a long time now that I'm writing a book, a novel, which is some sort of auto-fictional memoir of my growing up in Mbare. I grew up in Magaba.
I myself, when I was born in 1995, my parents were staying in Mbare. So that's the first place that I saw after that.
Which part of Mbare?
Well, I was staying the Stoddart area.
Oh, I see. I see.
Stoddart area.
Yeah, but the difference between Stoddart and Magaba, where I was born, is that Magaba is more crowded than Stoddart. Stoddart has is relative decorum when we compare it with Magaba, Matererini, and Matapi. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So I've been promising my readers that I'm working on a novel, an autofictional memoir of my growing up in Magaba, and I titled it Magamba Hostels. I put an M there to fictionalize it, but otherwise it's actually inspired by an actual place and actual events. And because I'm meticulous with writing, I knew I was going to take a long time to complete, the first draft of that manuscript. So I decided to give my readers a trailer to the novel, and that trailer is a collection of poems that are actually inspired by my growing up in Mbare and by being a Zimbabwean in general. And the first poem I wrote, which went on to feature in that collection, is titled Magamba Hostels, to my unborn novel. I dedicated it to the novel that I'm currently writing. Yeah, so those are the things that I'm working on and the things that I've worked on.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful! You are doing a very brilliant job. I'm loving having this discussion with you, particularly because I've been following the news recently, especially the academic news, particularly from the Institute of Social Science Research. They did a small survey that they did, and they came up with the results that many people across the world actually do enjoy reading fictional literature than they enjoy reading non-fictional academic work, because it resonates with their life experiences, it resonates with their everyday experiences at work, at home, and everything. So I've decided to say, no, I need to have a discussion with somebody who is in the field of writing fictional literature. So first of all, what is this thing that we call fictional literature, and what does it encompass?
Thank you. Maybe we can start by talking about what literature itself is.
Oh, wonderful.
In order for us to pin down the phrase fictional literature, the most basic definition of literature is that it is a representation of life. So all literature is about representation. Which means the raw material that we use in order to create literature is life itself. But if you go to definitions by many scholars, they will talk about literature as an aspect of cultural production. For example, one definition of culture is that it encompasses all the artistic productions of a society. So you cannot actually separate literature from culture. You cannot separate literature from life. Which means beyond just representing life, literature is life itself. Why am I saying that? Because without life, there is no literature.
There is no. Oh, yeah.
Yes, storytelling is as old as humanity itself.
Okay.
The day men began to walk on earth, they began to tell stories, and those stories did not emanate from a vacuum, but they came from the life that those people were living. So you cannot separate. Yes. So you cannot separate literature from life. So literature, the most advanced definition, therefore, is that literature is life. It is not just a representation of life. It is life. It is part of society. It is the cultural production of a people who are living in a society. That's literature for you. So what then is fictional literature? Fictional literature basically means literary creation that is based on, that can be based on real events, real people, but then which seeks to alienate those real events and real people, from what we know, and present them as something new.
Okay. Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? For example, the second Chimurenga in Zimbabwe can be represented in fiction. It's an actual event, but in order to alienate it, it has to appear to us as something new. it's a process of alienating, us from the events that we know by creating new events that we can read about, in a piece of work. But that doesn't mean that what literature is saying cannot happen. It is just a way of maybe of not wanting to cause trouble by actually talking about actual people using actual names, actual events. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You never know. I've always told people that in my novel Magamba Hostels, I'm using actual events. I'm using actual people. But in order to alienate them from the story, I create new names, and I tweak the events a little bit. I tweak them a little bit so that we don't appear to be writing about an actual person who actually exists. That's why you see that sometimes there is a disclaimer that any similarity to actual people is coincidental. What we're merely trying to do is to say, if someone discovers that this is their story, the similarity is merely coincidental. It was not the intention of the writer to create such a similarity. But then when you look at that disclaimer, what the disclaimer is actually saying is that there is a huge possibility that what is being written has actually happened. So even though it is fiction, it doesn't mean it didn't happen. It happened. I've had an experience, for example, with my poems, where people who actually know me were quick to say, but we think this happened. Because probably they were there. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So it's fiction by virtue of us alienating the story from what we know and saying, look, this is just appearing in a book, on the pages of a book. So it's just a story. It's a process of alienating it. But otherwise, the truth of the matter is that literature is real. The events that we capture in literary works are real. The people we talk about in literary works are real. They are not just real to the writer. Of course, we has to fight with characters to make them do what he wants. But they are also real in the sense that they are being forklifted from the actual life that we live. A writer cannot go where he's never gone. A man can only walk from where he's standing. That's the thing. So the word fiction there must not mislead us into thinking that it doesn't happen.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wonderful.
And so the purpose therefore of fictional, works is to create something that is nearer to reality, something that mimics reality, something that is a mirror, of reality, and for you to see your image in a mirror, it means the original must be there.
Must be, yeah.
Yes, which means the actual life that we live is the original, foundation of the story. And when the story appears, it becomes a mirror of that reality. And that reality basically is the life that we live every day. That's fictional literature for you.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah.
This sounds very, very exciting.
Sure.
Well, right. So just help me, enlighten me something here. Does this literature reflect society? Or is the other way around, in which the society itself reflects the literature?
The response I'm going to give you to that is two-pronged. One, writers are produced by society. Even one of the most quoted, statements is the one by Marichera, in which he says, if you are a writer for any tribe or a people, and then he uses the F word, which I am not at liberty to use right now, because I'm in the presence of respectable people. But what people make the mistake of thinking that Marichera was saying, literature must be dissociated from people. That's not what he was saying. Because the truth of the matter is that you cannot write in a vacuum. Even in science fiction, because people think that science fiction is about things that are extraterrestrial, things that are.
Yeah.
But the truth of the matter is that science fiction comes from life. And by life, we don't just mean the life that we see, but even the life that we don't see. The steerings of the mind are part of life. And if someone's mind, the dreams, the nightmares, in nightmares, there is a lot of science fiction that goes in there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
How many times have we have used wings in dreams?
Yeah, exactly.
And so when I write about a man who flies, not using an aeroplane, but actually flying using wings, it may be science fiction, but it's part of life because I encounter those things in my dreams or in my nightmares. So there is no way a writer can write without society. That's impossible, because society is the basis, on which we create our fictional stories. It's the raw material that we use in order to create our fictional stories. So, if society is the basis, is the raw material, it means literature inevitably reflects society. It is a reflection of society. If you want to understand the 1970s of Zimbabwe, you read literary texts that were published in the 1970s, or even literary texts that were published later, but which thematize issues of the 1970s.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm a born free myself. I've never been to the war, but the truth of the matter is that my access, to stories about the war is via literature. I can imagine the 1970s, the Bush War of the 1970s, via literary texts that were created by writers who imagined that war as fiction. As fiction, but which reflects the reality of the 1970s. So yes, literature reflects society. But let's go to the other question that you asked. Does society reflect literature? The relationship is symbiotic, really. One of the criticisms that have been leveled against Dambudzo Marechera's House of Hunger is its vulgarity, as if Marechera and his book are not products of society. The truth of the matter is that it is society that created Marechera, and it is society that indirectly created the House of Hunger. Society cannot dissociate itself from the works that Marechera has created because he's part of that society. He's a product of that society. And the literary work that he created is also a product of that society of the 1970s. So the relationship is symbiotic. Society inspires us to write. Society can even influence the direction art is going to take. How do they influence that direction? They influence it via literary criticism, which is what I do, for example. They influence it, via comments from readers. They actually help in the literacy level, even of society, helps in shaping, the direction that literature is going to take. So there is a symbiotic relationship where each is reproduced in the other. You can't separate them. It's a two-way relationship. Yes. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Thank you very much. Well, as you may know, based on studies that have been made in history, most of the revolutions that we talk about today, the French Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, the Industrial Revolution itself, it was inspired by great philosophers and great writers who accounted for those events and who even inspired people to take up action that resulted in the toppling of dictatorial and authoritarian regimes, like what happened with Louis XVI in France in 1789. But now we do see that literature plays a very important role. The writings of Charles Dickens, if I recall correctly, Charles Dickens writes at a time when England was going through the Industrial Revolution. And everything that he writes directly reflects everything that the working class was experiencing, something that is then echoed by scholars like E.P. Thompson, who then write as history. Now, looking at all this impact that literature has, and looking at juxtaposing this with the political upheaval that we have in the context of Zimbabwe today, what sort of power does literature has in the midst of a revolutionary political atmosphere like we have today? And what sort of role do these literary critics and writers have in this process?
Thank you. First, I want to avoid the use of the word revolution.
Okay, yeah.
Because my experience as a Zimbabwean is that revolutions are deceitful. They never end. We keep looking for the end product of
thank
the
you
revolution.
for that.
That's why when you look, for example, at Zimbabwe's revolution, there is this logical linearity that keeps adding, more revolutions to the one that we already embarked on in the 1970s. In fact, if we are to be true to history, in the 1890s when Biani and company revolted against settlerism. But when you look at what I'm calling the logical linearity, of the Zimbabwean revolution, it manifests, in the naming of the revolutions. There's the first Chimurenga, there's the second Chimurenga, there is the third Chimurenga. Who knows? There may be a fourth Chimurenga.
A fourth one, yeah.
Then there is the old dispensation, then there is the new dispensation, and then I don't know what we'll have in the future. But the thing is, I'm wary of using the term revolution to describe social change. To describe social change, I prefer social change because it doesn't promise too much. Revolutions promise too much. That's why you see that Marechera. I'm quoting Marechera a lot. Because when it comes to revolutions, he is one of those writers who are accused of not taking the revolution seriously or ridiculing the revolution itself. That's why you see that as early as 1978, he was already prophesying using his pen the outcome of the revolution of the 1970s. And he even says, many a time writers are recruited into a revolution before it bears the fruit that it is promising. And many a time when that happens, those writers are disillusioned, and we start to accuse them, of not knowing where they are standing. But the truth of the matter is that maybe those writers might have been tricked, into joining a revolution full scale before that revolution, had produced the fruit it was promising. In music, I can give the example of Thomas Mapfumo, for example. When we look at what we call Chimurenga music. On the surface, the implication is that Chimurenga music is music that is sung against colonial rule. Where the musician does on stage what the guerrillas are doing in the bush.
Exactly.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. But come 2000, in the old dispensation, Thomas Mapfumo started to sing against the same brothers he was supporting through his music in the 1970s. Can we say his music ceased to become Chimurenga music just because he was singing against blacks?
Okay, yeah.
You see what I'm saying? But Mapfumo could have avoided such a schizophrenia by keeping a healthy distance from that revolution in order to be able to talk about it and to critique it when it goes wrong.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think writers can do well if there is a healthy distance
Okay.
between
Yeah.
between themselves
Wonderful.
and revolutionaries. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because these revolutions, you never know what they're gonna do next.
Yeah. The outcome.
And then you look at a writer who had put his everything into a so-called revolution, and then looking back and saying, what the heck did I do? You know what I'm saying? So you find that such writers enter into a dilemma. You know, they start to experience very serious schizophrenias. Why? Because they committed themselves and their pens to a revolution before that revolution had produced the fruit that it was promising.
Exactly. Yeah.
But there are certain writers, and they can't avoid it. You know, it's unavoidable. There are certain writers who are revolutionaries, and you can't take that away from them. I'll give you one example of a writer whom I think is a revolutionary writer, and that's Ngugi wa Thiong'o.
Oh, yeah.
Ngugi is revolutionary in his approach. But the difference between Ngugi and the other revolutionary writers is that Ngugi's revolution, or Ngugi's commitment to the revolution, allows him to maintain a distance from so-called revolutionaries. So in A Grain of Wheat, you find him writing about the Kenyan revolution against colonial rule, or in Matigari. And then in Petals of Blood, you find him writing against, you know, a post-colonial misrule. And then in Decolonizing the Mind, or even in Globaletics, you find him, you know, writing against, you know, global superpowers that you know, marginalize cultures that are not Western. You see what I'm saying? There is something to Ngugi's revolution that allows him to be respected because he aligns himself with his own vision as a writer, and not with a vision of any revolution that you can put a finger on. This is the revolution that Ngugi is supporting. This is the movement that he's supporting, which is led by so and so. You can't say that about Ngugi. You see what I'm saying? But there are certain writers, you know, whom you can actually, you know, whose support of a revolution is so obvious. You can even locate the human revolutionary that they are actually supporting. I'll give you one example. For example, when you read Agrippa Mtambara's The Rebel in Me, you can find that this guy is supporting Robert Mugabe.
Exactly.
But what happens when Robert Mugabe goes, or when Robert Mugabe is removed, and a new dispensation is ushered in? Will Agrippa Mtambara continue to say he is a rebel and he supports Robert Mugabe? You see what I'm saying? So there is this healthy distance that, you know, writers must maintain between themselves and the so-called revolution, because that distance allows them to be objective and allows them, you know, to critique that revolution if it goes away from the way. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly. I see. Now let's look at one problem that we have in this field of of fictional literature writing, which is the problem of the politicization of this whole writing process and publishing. It seems that it is a valid point. It is a very important point for the writers themselves to distance themselves from political affiliations that will result in diluting the content of their subject matter. But now, it seems that certain literature that peddles forward a certain political agenda that is favored by a ruling elite is given much more attention, much more public audience, much more fun, so that it reaches as wide as a bigger audience as possible, because it's funded, it's fully supported, advertised. Whereas the literature that doesn't peddle a certain political agenda that is considered fashionable or favorable by the ruling elite is sort of sabotaged and so forth. Do you think that this is a major problem that is probably affecting both the subject matter of literature and the writers themselves?
You know, I'm at the moment working on a research paper titled "The Schizophrenia of Writing in Zimbabwe," in which I try to capture the dilemmas of writers who are operating in post-2000 Zimbabwe, in Mugabeist. At that time, at the time I started the research, it was Mugabeist, you know, Zimbabwe. You will find that before you know it as a writer, you're already censoring yourself. You know what happens, you know, if you cross boundaries in terms of subject matter. You know, if you cross, even as a literary critic, you know, for example, if I'm writing a book review for a patriotic newspaper, I know the kind of language I should use. I just don't write, because there are languages that we use that we know are safer than other languages. And so, yes, many writers find themselves, you know, going through censorship without even being told, on their own. You know, they start censoring themselves. They start saying, well, I can't write like this, you know, maybe I'll get into trouble, or but sometimes we overemphasize the danger. Sometimes it's actually not there. I'll give an example. There are many books that have been published post-2000 outside Zimbabwe, and I don't remember the writers themselves getting into trouble for that. But there are many subversive books that were written, that if you read them very closely, you can actually discover the kind of language that the writer is using. That you can actually say, this kind of language, you cannot use it in Zimbabwe before Robert Mugabe. In front of Robert Mugabe, you can't use this language. But there were many writers that could use that language, and nothing happened to them. So sometimes as writers, we overemphasize the danger that we face, yet sometimes it doesn't exist. But there are also other times that the danger actually exists, and the writer must write in a certain way. But the other problem that writers face is that writers are consigned into political groupings against their own will. Sometimes I just want to write. No, I'm not advancing any political position. I'm just writing.
But people categorize you.
People categorize because people love labeling. People love categorizing. And so you find, you know, critics and readers saying, he wrote like this because he's supporting this political grouping. Yet the truth of the matter is that as a writer, I'm just using the raw material that is in front of me in order to create a story that my readers will love. You know what I'm saying? Which makes me go back to your question. What is the role of literature during periods of political revolutions? The role of literature during periods of political revolutions is to record those political revolutions for the benefit of posterity. You see what I'm saying? And so we go back to what I was talking about concerning the Chimurenga Revolution, that I can only access it, you know, via literary texts. Harvest of Thorns, The Non-Believer's Journey. You know, I can only access what has been taking place in the 1970s via literary texts that were written during that period, or that were written about, you know, that period. Why? Because literature is part of memory. Literature stores memories. And so what some writers merely want to do is to record the upheavals of the period, is to record things of the period, or is to create good stories out of the things that are happening during a particular period, without necessarily wanting to advance a particular political point or a particular political ideal. But that's definitely different when you look at Russian writers that you cited, Maxim Gorky, you know, Sholokov, How the Stew Was Tempered, and Quiet Flows the Dawn, Mother. Those guys actually deliberately created literature that had to, you know, advance, you know, a socialist revolution. We can talk about feminist writers. Feminism is not just an ideology. It's a revolution led by feminists. You see what I'm saying? And so you actually find writers who are not only feminists because of the subject matter, but who are self-proclaimed feminists, writing about female issues. Such writers have chosen their political ideal, and they are standing by it. We as readers are not assigning them to that particular political standpoint. They've proclaimed that is where they belong. You understand?
Yeah.
Agrippa Mtambarasi, the rebel in me, he has proclaimed that this is where I belong. I am ZANU-PF, I support Robert Mugabe, and that is why I'm a rebel. You see what I'm saying? He has proclaimed it. You see what I'm saying? But there are other writers who keep a healthy distance. That thing I've been talking about. Who keep a healthy distance from political groupings, from political ideals, but without necessarily avoiding those political ideals when it comes to creating literature. Here is the thing we have to understand concerning Zimbabwean literature. It is very difficult for many Zimbabwean writers right now to create a story about Zimbabwe without getting enmeshed, in all these political problems that we have, in all these economic problems that we have, in all these social problems that we have. I can give you an inventory right now of Zimbabwean literary texts that were published since 2000 up to the present period, and you will see that most of them are talking about the things that we go through.
Yeah.
Harare North, for example, talks about Operation Murambatsvina, talks about Robert Mugabe. You see what I'm saying? We need new names by No Violet Ulawe, talks about Operation Murambatsvina, talks about what? Robert Mugabe. The Uncertainty of Hope by Valerie Taguia talks about what? Operation Murambatsvina. You see what I'm saying? The Magistrate, the Maestro, and the Mathematician by Tendai Huchu, talks about migration because of the economic downturn that we were experiencing post-2000. Talks about all these problems that we talks about MDC. You see what I'm saying? Talks about the CIO. Talks about state apparatus. Talks about all those things. These are very prominent publications. You see what I'm saying? House of Stone by Rosa Chuma talks about Gukura Hundi. You see what I'm saying? African Tears by Catherine Bako talks about the land reform program. On the Trek and Other Stories by Lawrence Hova talks about the land reform program. So you can see that it is really difficult, for most Zimbabwean writers, to talk about Zimbabwe without getting embroiled in all these issues.
Exactly.
And I can even extend this observation to academia.
Exactly.
Many academic researchers post-2000 are embarking on academic researches that inevitably contain something about Robert Mugabe. That inevitably, if they're researching about Zimbabwe, that inevitably contains something about the post-2000 period and the upheavals that were occurring in that period. And I can tell you that many research papers, even where we try to interpret literary texts, inevitably we find ourselves talking about Zimbabwe, talking about Zimbabwe's politics, and talking about all these problems that Zimbabwe is going through. But without necessarily saying we are talking about this in order to advance particular political ideals. We are talking about this in order to understand our society, in order to explain what is happening in our society. So as a writer, especially talking about myself, when I talk about these things, it's because I can't explain my life or even understand it without having to do with how those things shaped that life.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's difficult. It's difficult, as a person who grew up in Mbare, which during the 2000s was one of the most politically volatile, suburbs in the country. How can I talk about growing up in Mbare without talking about those things, without talking about Chipangano, for example, or without talking about party meetings that would occur almost twice or thrice per week? It's difficult because growing up, those things shaped my life and shaped my view of my immediate and even wider world.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But if talking about those things does not necessarily mean I'm advancing a particular political ideology.
And
I'm just talking about, that's life.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Exactly.
That's how we grew up. During the evening, we will go to the party meeting. We will chant party slogans.
Exactly.
So what? It doesn't mean I'm advancing a particular political ideology. I'm just talking about the things that were happening in my life when I was growing up, because that was part of the package. You see what I'm saying? But then when people who are embroiled, in revolutionary change, get hold of those literary texts, sometimes they interpret them in a way that advances, particular political ideologies.
Yeah, exactly.
And the problem is not the writer. Once I publish a work of art, the interpretation of that work of art is no longer in my hands.
It's in the
Yes.
the hands of the audience, right?
The reader. It is the reader who is communing with my text,
exactly.
and who is making certain conclusions about that text. And I can't go on a tour in order to correct people's perceptions about my work.
Yeah.
Because there are many subtexts in a single text. And particular subtexts are unearthed by readers to the extent that even the writer himself can get surprised. You see what I'm saying? To the extent that the writer can actually say, people are lying that I'm advancing this particular ideology. I'm not,
yeah.
But how the reader interprets a work of art can actually, make that work of art speak to a particular revolution, even against the writer's will. It's very possible. Yes.
Oh, yeah, I see. Well, thank you very much for that response, Dr. Chidora. Now let's look at the question of the youth. The youth are at the center of all this. Politically, the youth are the most affected people by what's happening in our country today. They are the most people who are affected by unemployment. They are the most people who are affected by low income status and many other problems. The youth are the people that are expected to be participating much more in politics than the elderly and these other childhood ages. But now, the youths themselves, being the most affected, being the most politically oriented, are the most people again whom we expect to be the most avid readers of the literature gets published, right? But now, the youths of today, what are they reading? Are they even reading at all? What are they reading? And are they even reading at all?
That's a good question. I will refer to myself because I have this healthy past. I can't say healthy past. Rich past, because half of my childhood was spent in the village, and the other half was spent in Bari. And while growing up in the village, I was taught by expatriate teachers who introduced me to literature, and so I can say I read War and Peace when I was in Form 2, which is one of the most voluminous novels I've ever come across. I was in Form 2, I was 15 when I read that novel. Then I did Ango Teach. I've written about him a lot of time. Who introduced me to Marechera, to Charles Mugoshi, to Mario Puzo, Frederick Forst, Wilbur Smith, and so on and so forth, before I had reached Form 4. So by the time I came to Harare, I was already an avid reader. I created alternative worlds, by reading literary fiction. Before even accessing city lights, city pavements, I accessed them via, Nancy Drew novels and Ad Boys novels. I could even imagine what America looked like, from the comfort of my village. you see what I'm saying?
That's the power of
that's the power of literature. Exactly. It allows you to imagine. So when I went to university, I had the choice. I had two choices to make. Either I was going to study rural development and resettlement, or I was going to study BA in order to study literature. And I chose the latter. Yeah, I chose to study literature, at the expense of rural development and resettlement. But one of the reasons why I chose not to study resettlement was that in Zimbabwe, you don't need to go to school in order to resettle.
Oh,
In the post-2000 period, all you needed was to lobby for the land. And then you go to this farm and say, we are sharing this farm. You white person, go away. That's it.
Exactly.
But I really chose literature because I loved it. And right now, during this lockdown period, I'm reading. I prefer reading to watching movies. And when I watch a movie, a film adaptation of a novel I've read, sometimes I get disappointed because it doesn't get to the level, of the novel. But that's besides the point. So what I'm saying is that probably I grew up in a different period where we had all these people who were avid readers. Had the boys in the village who could give you a Mario Puzo novel, yes, we the smokers who could give you a Wilbur Smith novel, and you could sit with them under the tower light and talk about that novel. In Magamba Hostels, I have a character who is a war veteran who has lots of books in his house, and he's also one of the people who introduced me to books when I was growing up.
Wonderful.
So I had this advantage of easy access to books because I had grown up, who loved books and who loved to see me, reading books. But when it comes to the youth of today, and it's not just the youth, even grown-ups, the reading culture, especially in Zimbabwe, is in some ICU of sorts.
Oh my.
The reason is that books occupy the lowest level in the pecking order of needs. When it comes to Zimbabwe, the priority is to eat first. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. So where people have to commit all these miracles in order to put food on the table, do you think they will find time to buy a book? I am even tempted to use actual names and in writing Magamba Hostels because I'm convinced. The people I grew up with in Magamba will never read that. so it's in the economic environment that we have right now. The book is not one of the major needs. The major need is for people to survive, to last the day, and so really buying a book is not a priority of many people. Someone must really be a book lover, must have a passion for literature in order to actually buy a literary text. I have the advantage of being in academia. So communing with literary text is something I cannot avoid. I have to look for them. I have to find them.
You read for a living.
I read for a living. Yes, I talk about literary text for a living. And I create literary text for a living. So I can't avoid it. I can't avoid it because we sharpen the skill of writing from reading other writers' works. But when it comes to the youths, in Zimbabwe, we have a problem. Many of them would, at university, for example, if in a course where we don't have set books that people can read, where students can refer to any book they have read, I was shocked to discover that most of the books that they referred to are books that they read at A level.
Oh, yeah.
Which means even after getting to university, some of them are not even reading books.
Yeah.
They are just going for spark notes and everything. Producing essays. You see what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying? So even for those who are going to university right now, reading is just not one of the major things. But we don't have to make the mistake of thinking that the youths are lazy because they are not reading. Maybe they have other artistic experiences that they can use, that they can access, in order to be able to understand the world, in order to be able, to understand, the things that happen around them. I'll give you an example of one of the most prominent cultural revolutions to have ever occurred in Zimbabwe since independence, Zimdanzo. DJ Fandane has led one of the biggest cultural revolutions of the post-1980 period via music. Is what I'm saying. Where the youths are creating art and consuming it at the same time. And in one of my research papers, I have even termed Zimdanzo art that is created from the margins. You see what I'm saying? So, which brings me back to your comment that youths are expected to be at the center of political developments. The truth of the matter is that many African youths are not at the center of political developments. And where they are at the center of political developments, they are there at the behest of elders. You see what I'm saying? But the truth of the matter is that the political developments in Africa are largely led by elders. Of course, the elders will talk about the youths as the leaders or future leaders. But the truth of the matter is that it's a mirage. I grew up being told that I'm tomorrow's leader. I'm still waiting for the day.
Yeah, you're still waiting for the tomorrow.
Wait for the tomorrow. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So youths are not largely at the center of political developments. They are usually at the margins. They are only at the center in order to legitimize the politics of the elders, or in order to be puppets, in the political developments that are being led by elders. That's where you locate the youths. That's where you locate the youths. I don't think the youths have become so powerful in Zimbabwe, or even in many countries in Africa, so powerful to dictate political developments. I don't think so. I don't think so. Which is why when you look at the spaces that most of our youths occupy, they are marginal spaces. They are spaces where they are outside, the precincts of power. And then because they are outside the precincts of power, they have these other things, these other artistic experiences outside power that they can engage in, but which they can also use in order to critique power, which is where you locate Zimdanzo. Youth culture, by its very nature, is usually stands in opposition to parent culture. And we cannot just explain it away by saying it's juvenile delinquents. No. It's not. It actually reflects the political culture of that country.
Yeah.
When youth culture stands against parent culture, we have to ask questions concerning the political developments of our country, concerning the political culture of our country. And so Zimdanzo becomes this artistic expression that is happening at the margins where you find the youth. And these are the same youths, for example, who stand under the tower, who congregate under the tower light at night in order to smoke weed and talk about anything, football
or even compose a song.
Or even compose a song,
yeah.
While being applauded by your peers.
Yeah.
Or even talk about the latest, tennis shoes, Converse shoes, the latest, hoodie jackets and everything. That's the stuff they used to talk about when they congregate under the tower light or under the Msau tree, or in the case of Magamba, they lean against the wall of their flats and talk about anything, and smoke weed and drink beer and drink broccoli and do all sorts of things. These are the same youths who create Zimdanzo. But of course, not all of them do that. But what I'm saying is that we don't have to blame them for not reading. The economic culture of the country dictates that you survive first before buying a book. You see what I'm saying? And then for some of them, Zimdanzo becomes that artistic expression that is more accessible, because you don't need to go to university in order to compose a song. You can just do it under the tower light, and you don't need to read lots of books, in order to be able to write your own. In Zimdanzo, you just write and rhyme, and then you go to DJ Fund and produce who already has a pre-recording of a beat. Waiting for you. And that's it.
Exactly.
So the youths are engaged in some kinds of reading, but not the reading that we think. Maybe they are reading society and explaining it via their lyrics. Maybe they are reading the political culture of our country, the economic culture of our country, and explaining what they have read. You know, and by read I mean what they have seen. You know, they're explaining it via lyrics.
Yeah.
So it's some kind of reading, but not the reading that we expect. But in terms of book reading, my friend, it's in some ICU. That's the truth. and it gets us to the question of, so where exactly are our writers marketing their books?
Exactly. Which is my next question for you.
Exactly. You can go ahead and ask it.
Yeah. Which is my next question for you. Like, what's happening with the marketing part of fictional literature, of literature in broadly? Like, why is it not reaching a wider audience? And what can be done for us to get this literature to reach a wider audience and to increase its accessibility by the ordinary person?
That's a good question. When I published, because Sadness is Beautiful, it's being internationally distributed. And there is this problem where in Zimbabwe you can't access books. You have an RTGS account. How are you going to purchase a book on Amazon?
It's difficult.
Many Zimbabwean writers have their books on Amazon, but accessing them, oh God, it's quite an affair. But not only that, even if you eventually access it, the amount Sorry, there was an incoming call.
No problem. I think there was an interruption, but let me get back to you.